Hi everyone and welcome back to the FPL Family YouTube channel. I'm Sam and today's video comes as a request. So I put out there on Instagram and over on our Patreon channels, did anybody have any ideas or anything that they wanted us to particularly talk about this pre-season to help them with their planning going into the new season? And one of the things that came up on multiple occasions was for some top tips for how to do well at FPL. And not only that, based upon kind of my learning points from last season. So I've picked out a few, which I think are things that I'm going to live by this season and how I kind of go about my pre-season planning. Now I've put a few keywords here as to the things that are really important, but I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about all of these. So in terms of the fixtures, I think that, most FPL managers, generally speaking, will look at the fixtures and will have kind of that in the back of their head when they're making decisions or planning their transfers. But for me, I like to do a bit more with the fixtures than just that. I like to sort fixture tickers so that I can see who's got great away form, who's got great home form, who's got the best defensive start to the season, who's got the best attacking start to the season, and of course overall who's got the best periods of fixtures. And I like to kind of divide up the fixtures into little chunks. So I start off during pre-season looking at game week 1 and then roll it forward to game week 3, game week 5, game week 8 and have a little look at how my team looks across those periods of time. And in doing that, you kind of get an understanding of where might the weaknesses come, where might be the positions that need to be changed, and where might there be players who suddenly get into a nice fixture run and therefore you might want to bring them in. So I'm thinking about in particular teams like Norwich, who come game week 4-5 have a really nice set of fixtures that last them quite a long time. Obviously, you're not going to have them for this early part of the season when they've got a horrendous start to their first time back in the Premier League, but in a couple of weeks' time, those will be players worth looking at. So in my head, in this early pre-season period, I'm kind of looking at who do I want now for game week 1? Who might I want between game week 1 and game week, say, 13 when I might wildcard? And can I bring those players in successfully just using free transfers? I'm not opposed to taking points hits, but last season I did try not to have any points hits for the entire season. Didn't quite work out in the end because I had a couple of issues that I had to fix. I think I took 2 points hits over the whole season, but I also burnt a few transfers and we'll come to that later. But I think in terms of fixtures, plan for the early ones, plan beyond game week 1, have a look at game week 1, game week 3, game week 5 and see how your team is faring. But not only that, really consider blocking and chunking down those fixtures into periods of time as the season goes on. So when you're thinking about your transfers, have a little think in real detail about game week 1 to 6, game week 7 to game week 13, game week 13 to game week 18. Chunk the periods of time down and that will really help you in your planning and make sure that you're hitting those nice purple patches when players and teams hit them, but also making sure that you're targeting the right teams and you know roughly which players are coming and going. Obviously you have to be aware of form, but you can roughly make those plans before we get into the season. The second thing that I think is a big deal to FPL managers is the price changes. Now, of course, in pre-season, we don't have this as something to deal with, but we quickly have this as an issue come game week 1, so, and particularly in game week 1, actually, because once game week 1 and game week 2 come around, if you lose money on a player, it's making it incredibly difficult to make those changes because, of course, you then don't have enough to fund the player that you want to bring in. Or the reverse of that, of course, is that you might want to bring in a player who goes up in price. So having a tool, having a site, just following the Twitter community, following those price changes is so important, particularly in this early part of the season, and building team value. Don't build team value to the detriment of your team, but the reality is the players that are doing well are going to be the ones that grow your team value. And that team value come Christmas and the end of the first wildcard, if you hold it, or particularly the second wildcard, having solid team value at that stage is really helpful for buying into those that we know are having good seasons and the teams in particular that we know are having good seasons. Now, the third one on here, overthinking. This is something that I know I am at times definitely it definitely happens to me. I am a firm believer in playing FPL with a gut instinct, and if you have a gut instinct that draws you towards a player, go with it. 9 times out of 10 the gut will be right, and sometimes when you have a gut thinking about a player, you will kind of talk yourself out of it on the basis that nobody else is doing it. But with every differential and with every jammy pick comes somebody going, just got this feeling about whoever it is. So don't overthink your transfers. Don't listen to too much chatter, because everyone will always have an opinion on which transfer they think is the best, or which player they think you should bring in and replace in your team. So don't overthink it. Listen to your gut. Think about what you're doing with your team and which players are the best enablers, because sometimes you'll be thinking, well, I need to take out this player because I need to free up some money for this one, so I'm going with this cheaper option. And a lot of people will go, why are you swapping this one for this one? But you're doing it for a specific reason. So don't overthink your team. Follow your gut. Listen to what's going on in the community. Listen to the chatter of the popular players, because they will come up and you'll hear people talking about the ones that you're best to go with. But definitely don't overthink it. Once you've made a decision, go with it. Don't kind of second guess yourself if you can. It's the hard thing to do. Transfers. Now, of course, just make them, but equally think about them. So last season, we all said, make your transfers right at the end of the week, because you never know what's going to happen with COVID, with games getting postponed, with players having to self-isolate. Hopefully, in the 21-22 season, we won't see quite so much of that. Hopefully, we'll have a bit more consistency across the course of the season. However, the transfer strategy that you deploy is still going to be really important. Now, for me, one of the things that I really like to do is to roll transfer from game week 1, so that I have 2 going into game week 2, and then I try wherever possible to always have 2 transfers, because that enables me to make mass moves whenever I need to for very little hits. It allows you to have those kind of mini wildcards where you spend 4 points, but you can make 3 transfers, and I really like that flexibility that gives. So I try to roll my transfers as much as possible. I also think it's really important to try to think ahead with your transfers. So last season I burnt 4 transfers, meaning I just didn't use them. I rolled them and then I didn't have anything to do and I burnt them. But I don't burn transfers, you know, at the drop of a hat. I really thought about that and whether my team needed any changing, because there's nearly always something that you can do. And sometimes there were a couple of transfers where I thought, yeah, okay, I could make this change ahead of maybe 3 or 4 game weeks time. So maybe just have a little think long term. If you get to a game week and you've got 2 free transfers and you really don't know what to do, then look 2 or 3 games into the future and think, is there a change I can make on my bench that's going to put this team in a better position when we get a few more game weeks down the line? Making those transfers early may put you in a good position. Now, of course, sometimes it backfires. If you make a transfer in game week 2 because you've got a transfer and it's going to burn, but you don't really want that player until game week 5, there is potential, of course, that something goes wrong in that period of time, but you were going to have wasted that transfer anyway if you hadn't have used it. So in my view, it's worth having that long-term strategy when it comes to transfers. And I'm a firm believer in, sometimes I go against the community here, because some people in the community, anybody that upside chases, for example, are happy to bring in players just for 1 game week because there's the potential there for them to really exceed in that game week and then move them on again. Now, I don't think that that's a bad strategy by any stretch of the imagination, and of course it can work really well. But the way I like to play FPL is to think through my transfers and bring in players that are going to be good, not just for the week that they're coming in for, but for the kind of foreseeable future, for at least a couple of game weeks. I want to get maybe 3 or 4 game weeks out of a player before I have to move them on again. Because, and this goes into the other part of this, I think with your transfers, you should be replacing the worst players in your team, the ones that you've got the biggest problems with, rather than replacing the best players in your teams and the ones that you don't necessarily have to deal with. Always deal with your real problems first. Now, of course, sometimes that's not always possible, but it is if you think through and plan into the future. But it also means that sometimes you have to really have thought through what you want to do, and you have to be looking a bit more long term. In my opinion, you have to look into the future a little bit more and think, right, am I happy to bring in this player for this game week, knowing that he's got these fixtures that follow? And if the answer is yes, then he goes straight to the top of my required in my FPL team list. If the answer is, well, I want him for this game week, but then actually the next 4 are really difficult and I'm not sure I would want him, then sometimes it's worth not having the points that they would bring. It doesn't always work. But of course, if it's going to be a transfer in and a transfer out, particularly if it's going to be a points hit transfer in to transfer back out again, I stay away from those things. But that's just my way of playing FPL. Chip strategy. Now, this is something that I have a video coming out on the channel all about chip strategy. I think it's really important that when you go into the season, you have a little bit of a plan for chip strategy. But of course, you have to be flexible. Chip strategy is all about getting the most that you can from the chips that you have available. So I start the season knowing that ideally I want to use my bench boost, my triple captain, and my free hit in double and blank game week. So I know that those chips are going to sit in my locker until probably February, March, April time, when the double and blank game weeks start to kick in. Although there are some rumours we might get some very late double game weeks next time around, like penultimate game week of the season late, but let's see how that pans out. So in my head, my chips are being saved for them, but that leaves me, of course, with decisions to make on wildcards. Now for me, the thing that has always worked, every season that I've had a good season, it's been when I've held my first wildcard as long as possible. A couple of seasons ago, when I had my best ever finish, I held it till the very last day that I could have used it, played it in that week, and that was hugely beneficial. It meant that going into the Christmas period, I was able to get on all of the players that were kind of hitting those nice runs of form, all of those that were in good fixture periods with their teams. And it meant that I could save the second wildcard because I'd already made the changes that a lot of people were going to make with their second wildcard with my first wildcard. And so having that second wildcard then put me in a really nice position going into the blanks and doubles and the kind of crazy period of time where FPL goes bonkers because we're all trying to work out how we get in as many double game weekers as possible in the double and also have as many players as possible for the single because they tend to be different. So yes, for me, having a chip strategy that's flexible when it comes to the blanks and the doubles is really important. And planning for a late wildcard is always something that I do, which is why going back to the fixtures, going back to the transfers, I like to fully plan them out in advance. In doing that, it allows me to make sure that my chip strategy goes as well as I can hope anyway, as well as I can plan for. And so that's really important to me. Chip strategy also, I always go into the season thinking, I don't mind if I have one of my chips remaining for the last game week of the season, particularly if it's a free hit. If we get away lightly on blank game weeks or my team just happens to be in that position where I can get away with it, having a free hit for game week 38 is a very nice place to be because it means when there is nothing to play for certain clubs, you can avoid them. When there's a lot to play for other clubs, you can get on board with those. And when there's likely rotation around, say, Champions League or FA Cup finals, we can also avoid that. So for me, having a free hit late is not a big deal, as is playing a triple captain band in a single game week. Don't be afraid to do that. A lot of FPL managers are scared of doing that because they think there's so much more benefit from a double game week. But we have seen in seasons gone by, particularly if you want to put your triple game week chip, triple captain chip, on a double game week from a club like Manchester City, there's no guarantees that they're going to play in both of those games, and therefore it's basically like you're playing it in a single game week anyway. So if you get the perfect player in the perfect run of form against the perfect team in a single game week, don't be afraid to play it at that moment. And the final thing that I would say is go into the season with the tools that you think you would like to use or have available to them. So I know that there are loads of tools out there in the community. Some are free, some you have to pay for, some of them are online, some of them are resources that kind of come from people like we have with Patreon, and some of them are actual physical resources like my new book that Mark sent me. Having things that you know for you work. So in every season I have a new FPL notebook. This is my one for this season. It won't last me the whole season because I will run out of space. I mean, I'm already nearly halfway through it and we're only in pre-season. But I have a notebook and I write everything down and I really think about what I'm doing. And the same with my fantasy football journal. Really think about it. I have bookmarks on the Fantasy Football Scout season ticker because that's really important. I'm also really liking the new Fantasy Football Scout transfer planner, which is available for premium members at Scout this year. It's great because you can put in players, you can see the transfers happening and what impact that's going to have. And it really fits into the way that I think when it comes to making my transfers and planning for the future. There are other resources out there which are incredibly useful. So have them ready and saved as bookmarks. Have them in your locker that you can use them at any point. And don't be afraid to go, actually, that tool doesn't really work for me, and leave it, even if it's something that everyone else really likes. There are certain things that go on in the community that I think, oh, that sounds fantastic. but it never quite works for me when I use them. And so as a result of that, I stick to what I know, and generally speaking that ends up being a pen and paper, although the transfer planner that Scout have out has sort of changed the way that I'm thinking about my transfers over the course of the 21-22 season. So really think about the tools that are available out there. There are so many good things. Live FPL, for example, have that saved and use it to your advantage. There are so many things in there, comparisons, being able to, one of the things I love on Live FPL is being able to look at percentage ownerships for multiple players at the same time. So for example, last season, of course, Son and Kane were incredibly popular picks. They weren't really on their own helping me. In fact, at times Kane was detrimental to my rank, but having him and Son together was a real positive for rank gain for me over the majority of last season, and I knew that because I was able to look it up on Live FPL. So having those tools and being able to say, right, I own Martinez, he's obviously not really helping my rank, he's just kind of protecting my rank. But if I add Matt Target to him, what will happen in terms of percentage ownerships, and will that be beneficial to me? So really think through what you might like to do with your team. Think about your transfers, think about your tools. For me, that's going to be so important this season, because we may have some more disruption over the course of this season because of COVID. We may have some more disruption, of course, during the early part of the season because the transfer window is still going to be open. So having in your mind an idea of where you're going is really, really useful. I hope that that's been helpful, and there are plenty more videos to come between now and August the 13th. If you have any top tips of your own, drop them in the comments below, because I'm sure they'll be useful to everyone watching this video. If you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button and give me a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much everybody for watching. I'll see you next time.